Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream. So, the state of the world where I live has changed quite rapidly over the course of this week. My city was in strict lockdown. We had a new reported case of coronavirus in the community, and so as of Sunday, last Sunday, 6 o'clock, the whole city was put in strict lockdown, which meant no leaving the house unless for essentials. No, you have to wear a mask all the time, always. Anyway, and of course, social distancing, normal stuff, good stuff. A whole bunch of people, thousands of people, had testing done because they were in areas that this infected person had been. So obviously the local government wanted to see whether or not there was any community spread, and thankfully, despite this person having traveled and been to a lot of places in the city, across the city, there was no new cases. We had zero community spread, which is really, really amazing. But it has meant that this week, work from home, obviously. But despite that, despite working from home and not having to commute and being stuck in my house all day, I didn't get a huge amount of reading done. We'll see if that changes with next week, because although the strictness of lockdown has kind of stopped, I just don't know how much additional reading I'll get done. Hello, Rin. Welcome to the live stream, as always. But I do have some manga to talk about. I have some physical manga as well as digital manga. A couple series actually ended this week, which was exciting. So I think I'm going to talk about the digital manga first that I finished, because I read 3 series this week and finished 2 of them. The other one is not yet finished, but I'll have words to say about those as well. And also, apologies in advance if things become stuttery, if my internet decides to cark it, if the stream just doesn't want to work. Despite this lockdown, well, I mean, the lockdown doesn't have any impact on it. We also had major bushfires, not in my area, but in my city had major bushfires. And then up in the northern parts of the state, we had cyclones. So it's just been a whole bunch of stuff going on here where I live. But where I live now is actually just hitting that. We're getting some of the weather, the tail end of the cyclone. So it's been storms. It's been storms here today, tomorrow, the next couple days. So that's why if my internet decides to go weird, if things are slow or not working, I'm gonna blame the storm. It's probably actually see, it's not inherently going to be my technological just ineptitude. I promise. So this week I read 2 manga series digitally. Well, 3, but I finished 2. The first one being Summertime Rendering, which is now completed, obviously. I think it's a 12-volume series in Japan, or will be 12-volume series in Japan, 12 or 13 volumes. It was a series that is still currently available in its entirety via the Manga Plus app, so you can read it all 100 and something chapters. Hello, Lasagna. Welcome to the stream. But you can read all of the 100 something chapters for free on Manga Plus, and it is a supernatural mystery, kind of Groundhog Day survival series about a young guy, teenage boy, who he's from this particular island, and he left 2 years prior because he wanted to go to the big city and kind of live his life and, discover the wider world. But he gets the very sad news that one of his childhood friends has died. The girl who he always had, a crush on, she sadly drowned after saving a local kid. So he's returning to his hometown for her funeral. When there, not only does he reconnect with a lot of the people he knows, notably this dead girl's younger sister, who again he knows very well, but some classmates and also just other folks in the town that he's grown up with. But all of a sudden, strangely, whilst he's out wandering, he discovers a girl that, Ushio, the girl who died, is there. He sees her, and she doesn't have any memories, and they're not quite sure what's going on. And so this kid, he gets thrust into the situation where he has to, in a Higurashi-esque sort of survival mystery, he has to prevent the events of a particular day from happening, wherein the entire island residents are murdered, killed in one fell swoop from supernatural forces. And so with the help of this mysterious second Ushio, as well as his friends and other people that he knows, including a mysterious novelist of whom he quite enjoys their work, altogether they have to figure out what the cause of this tragedy is and how to stop it, how to prevent it. And again, as I said, it's very Higurashi-esque. It loops, so it is like a Groundhog Day sort of narrative as well, wherein our main protagonist, when he dies, because he does, it kind of resets him back at an earlier point to kind of give him another shot. I will say, and this, as Lasagna put here, there is a mild amount of fan service. I will say that once you get into it, after the first dozen or so chapters, the fan service really, I didn't notice it whatsoever. It opens up, like the first chapter has a panty shot, and I can guarantee that it kind of does emphasize that with the looping thing. But in saying that, it wasn't an element that really came up again, or that I noticed that was egregious. There may have been fan servicey shots, things like that, but nothing that made me go like, well, this is unnecessary and weird and creepy. Because I will agree that in that first chapter there's a panty shot, and you're like, was this necessary? No. But is it in here because it's a shonen series? Yes. But it's not something that I think, it's not an ecchi series. It's not something that really relies on fan service. Once it's established itself and kind of set up the rules for the series, it's more so focused on the more mystery, horror, supernatural, problem-solving element of it. So yeah, as I said, if that is something that you disliked about the first bit, it is something that I didn't notice after a particular point. It wasn't something egregious, and it was something like I did notice it with that first chapter and with that first little bit, but it's not something like I wouldn't say, this is a series with a lot of fan service. It's a series that is a fan service series. It's not that. Or, I mean, everybody has different levels of what they enjoy, but it wasn't it wasn't egregious. So I finished that. I had read, I think I needed to read maybe 24 chapters of that, because I read a huge chunk of it back when the Manga Plus app first launched. I read from chapter 1 to chapter 90 or 70 or whatever it was, and I stayed up to date with it for a little while, and then I'd read it in batches every so often, and I think my last stopping point was 110, 111, and the actual series itself finished at 139. So when I heard that it had finished, and actually with the last chapter, like with a lot of manga, it also recently, especially, it announced that it was getting an anime adaptation. I decided to obviously finish it whilst I could. Hello, Archangel Manga. Welcome to the live stream. I'm talking about Summertime Rendering, which is actually worth the read, especially if you like Higurashi and things like that. And so I sat down, I read the last bit, and I was already kind of in the last arc. The last arc goes on for a long time. And it was kind of, I had to reread a little bit just because I was like, I don't know what's going on. It's literally been like a year or half a year since I've picked this up, so I don't know. I don't quite remember what's going on. But it was a strong ending. It was like Higurashi in that it was a satisfying, happy ending to a situation that for a lot of the series you don't know if that's going to be the case. It's not a brilliant series, not the best series that I've ever seen, but if you or read, I will be interested in seeing how the anime goes, depending on how long it is, depending on how much it adapts. I do think it has a lot of appeal to people who, again, like some of these series. I keep making the Higurashi comparison, but that really is the one that sticks out in my mind. The idea of, a small town, summertime, mysterious things going on, death, a strange festival. There's just a lot of elements, but this one is on an island, whereas that one is in the mountains. And Summertime Rendering is modern day, or modernish day. 2018 is, I think, when it's set. It's when it started. And it doesn't move too far out of 2018. But yeah, it was good. It had it did. I will say that I feel the ending, like with a lot of these mystery stuff, can be, I don't know what it is about mystery writers. I feel like they get so impressed with how clever they can make their solutions that it gets a little bit convoluted. And with this series, because there's a mystery element, but by the end of it, it's mostly like, no, we have to beat the bad guy, because there's no real mystery to it. It's more so problem solving, which is not a bad thing. That's good, but it does mean that it gets a little bit like, okay, yes, okay, like, I think it's time to wrap it up. And obviously it is ended now. And I do think it's one of those series that is probably more beneficial to read in a big chunk rather than following it week to week, because that's how I enjoyed it. Maybe some people do prefer to have just like weekly releases, so they can have time to ruminate on all the different pieces woven with each other and how things interact with each other. But I don't know. I think it's just a little bit easier to remember all of the different situations, all the different characters, and all the different like motivations and things when you read it, a big chunk of it, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, so that was this, and then they established that, and that was, yeah, I don't know. It just and it like Higurashi, it built off of each loop built off the previous. So if you have a fresher memory of the previous loops of the previous events, then obviously it's more satisfying when you realize what's going on and what choices are now being made in the current loop, quote unquote. Hello, Zach. Welcome to the live stream. But yeah, so I finished that one. It was good. It was one of the longer Jump Plus series that I've been reading for a long time. And considering that Hell's Paradise has just finished as well on there, I'm running out of things to read on Jump Plus, honestly, because a lot of the other series that I initially started with on that service have since ended. Moonland, which is wonderful, and Curtains Up, I'm Off, which was great. The fantasy one, I don't remember what it's called. Something. Oh, Sign of Abyss, The Sign of Abyss, or A Sign of Abyss, whatever it is. That was really good. But yeah, they're all over. They're all finished now, and I need to find some more stuff on that service to read. But that was the first one that I finished. Right, I think it ended on Saturday or Sunday last week. The same time that, I think it comes out the same time that Jump, weekly Jump does. So yeah, Sunday night / Monday morning. Then the other digital series that I finished this week, I actually finished today, was Ajin. This is a series that I used to own some of the volumes, but it was a series that I'd read via Crunchyroll's manga Simulpub service, and I caught up. So again, this is another series where every so often I'd catch up on the chapters that I hadn't read. So that would usually be like 20 odd chapters, maybe 15 chapters. And it's a quite slow-paced series. There's a lot of action and stuff going on, but there's so many events were stretched out. So you could leave it for 20 weeks and you'd still, or 20, however long, 20 chapters, and you'd still be in the same kind of situation. There was forward momentum, but it was kind of like, oh yeah, we're still fighting the bad guy. We're still doing this. Okay, that's cool. You don't need that much of a refresher. But Ajin, for anyone who doesn't know, is a series about a teenage boy called Kei who lives in this world. It is in modern day Japan, but there are a group of people hidden in society who may not even be aware of this themselves, but they are what is known as Ajin, aka demi-human, who are basically immortal. They can't die. And Kei's like quite a dedicated student. He wants to become a doctor. He doesn't really have too many friends aside from like one guy who's kind of inserts himself into his life. But in the first chapter, Kei is crossing the road and not paying attention, is hit by a truck. Obviously, in normal circumstances, that would just, you're dead, right? You're dead. And he is dead. In that moment, he's splattered across the street, and his classmates and the people who he was just talking to are horrified, but scarily enough, they see him revive, and so he is outed. He discovers that he is a Ajin, of which he obviously didn't know prior to this. And Ajin at this point, or at that point in the story, are kind of a open secret. They're not really seen as, like, people don't really believe that they exist, but there's rumors about them online, and there's some kind of discussion about this. But so all of the people who are rumored or suspected to be Ajin typically are taken away by like some government department and presumably captured for a long time to be tested on, etc. And in order to not come to that fate, Kei and his one friend start to try and escape from that, and through a whole series of just stuff, we are introduced, or Kei is introduced to another Ajin who he meets at this testing facility called Sato. and the two escape together. But it's very obvious, very quick to realize that Sato is the villain of the piece. He is the one who's kind of at the forefront of this idea that Ajin are kind of a more evolved humanity, maybe, or at least why should Ajin conform to society or subject themselves to dozens, hundreds, thousands of medical, experimentation and decades of just all of this and an excruciating existence? Why should we do that when we can't die and we can escape whenever we want? So, yes, basically the rest of the series is Kei trying to stop Sato from destroying the world, pretty much. At least Tokyo. Like, he does a lot of bad stuff, and it's a great series. Like, I have always enjoyed it. I think I've never seen the anime. I can't speak to it. Don't know. I know there's split opinions on it, but I'm not getting into that. Haven't seen it. But the story was always something that I really thought was done well. It's not, again, it's not anything new. It's very reminiscent of stuff like Tokyo Ghoul or hell, even Devil's Line. This secret group that is that face a lot of bigotry that could be used as sort of an allegory for certain marginalized groups that exist in society, and then this revolution, this protest from that group, and of course then when we talk about like Tokyo Ghoul and this split of like supremacy, what the idea of like being in a more evolved humanity versus like the lame normal humans. Again, not all of these are pretty tried and true tropes and settings, but again, doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. I do think that it was always pretty well executed. It was very clean and easy to follow for an action series, but it was definitely like a suspense, almost subterfuge kind of storyline as well. And the action, it's not an action in the same way that certain other series. I mean, it's a seinen for one, but it's a more cerebral set of circumstances and planning with strategy. There's a lot more strategy to this sort of action, and I hate to make the comparison, but it's sort of like Death Note in that it's more mind games than necessarily like, oh, who can punch this other guy who punches the hardest. It's not that. But again, there is quite a bit of firefight and actual action as well. But the core of it is that who can out scheme better, right? And whoever is more successful with their planning will be more triumphant. And what that means and kind of the implications of that. It was great. The last chapter has not, maybe it has now, I don't know, but it wasn't, last time I checked, it wasn't posted on the Crunchyroll manga app, which didn't surprise me because it does usually take a little while for some of those simulpubbed series to update, but it is available on Comixology Unlimited for free. So if you have a Comixology account, then you can read it there, or you can buy just that single chapter, and I think it's $1.99 or something, and read it if you're really wanting to. I have the unlimited subscription for Comixology and Amazon's or Kindle, so I just read it that way. It's just easier. So Ajin was good, and I think also, I mean, like with a lot of these series, it wasn't a surprise when Summertime Rendering was. I discovered it was ending. It had been, heading into the end game for a long time. Wasn't a surprise when Ajin was announced that it had reached its last chapter. It had been heading that way for a very long time. And the third digital series that I read this week, again through Crunchyroll manga, a series that I do not like, but I do enjoy tearing to shreds, and I do enjoy the unintentional humor and or horror that I gain from it. And also, it's another series that is definitely heading into its end game, right? Its final chapters. And that was Attack on Titan. I didn't read a huge amount of it. I think maybe 5-10 chapters, which leaves an additional 10 chapters for me to read. So, yes. I don't think longtime watchers, viewers, Twitter followers, whatever, however you know me, however you follow me and consume my content, I don't think it's a surprise to folks that I dislike Attack on Titan a lot, and for a lot of reasons. And it's not that I inherently went into the series wanting to hate it. In fact, I think most people, was introduced to the series via the original first season of the anime. I watched that when it came out. I thought it was a pretty solid, action horror. I thought that it was pretty well balanced. Majority of the characters were pretty interesting. I mean, Eren I'd never liked, and Mikasa, I just she fell sort of into that trope of being too perfect about everything. But I always liked Armin, and I still like Armin because he's the only one with half a brain cell to question, like, oh, maybe this is not a good thing. Rin, I haven't even gone to, but I'm gonna talk about Attack on Titan. So I will defend the first season of Attack on Titan, regardless of what the series turns into, regardless of how much of a mess it becomes, and despite its early problems, I do think that the manga is rough and not as oh my god. The anime is good because not only does it have the hook of the premise, which is, the survival horror action series, which is very compelling, and you have this whole revenge plot and all this stuff, and the greater mystery of what's going on, and Wit Studio did a great job at making everyone's character design consistent. Like, everyone has the same face throughout the series, which is good. Which is not something the manga can say that it has. And for me, I think also, then I have negative love for this series, honestly. It just, but the end and the way that the action is framed, the dynamic nature of it, the camera angles, the music is all done really well, that it captures your attention. It makes you invested very, very quickly. And the other thing that the first season of the anime does really, really well is that it's perfectly paced so that every episode ends on a cliffhanger, which makes you obviously want to watch the next thing. And you do get more and more invested in it. And then that first season ends, and you're like, okay. And then there was a big break before season 2. And that's obviously the first season ended, and a lot of people jumped onto the manga. I was included in that. I'm not hiding my background. I used to own Attack on Titan manga. I always thought the art was terrible, and I always thought that Isayama doesn't know how to foreshadow things. His writing, he doesn't follow a lot of rules for that are kind of staples for writing. And people are like, oh no, it's fine. Like, he's so brilliant. Think of all of these ideas. He says, no. And it just gets worse the more you get into it. But we're going to get to that. So it had a long break. And after the stuff from the first season of the anime, the series starts diving into a more political focused storyline, which isn't inherently wrong or bad. And I will admit that there's a lot of potential there. And there was good ideas that I think Isayama used and tried to expound on. But the more he got into it, and the more that we learn about this whole premise, this whole scenario, the more it becomes obvious that either Isayama is intentionally inserting very, very harmful and toxic beliefs from very toxic and harmful groups. Fascism is barely the surface of it, but is a very obvious one. It's not a coincidence that I don't even know what it's called, Survey Corps. It's not a coincidence that this military corps, this group, dresses the way that they do. That the setting is very European and Germanic, especially. A coincidence that certain characters act in certain ways. And people now like to defend the series as being against a lot of this things that people have accused of fascism, racism, sexism, all of these things. And my working theory is that Isayama had an idea, right? And I don't disagree with the idea that currently, and I guess the point of what he wanted to do with the later part of the manga, which is the really messy stuff, was this idea of cycles of hate and history repeating itself and cycles of abuse and, the breakdown of relationships and all of these things, which is, again, fine. But I do think that in trying to ape off of the, and this is being very on the nose, but the Nazi aesthetic, that, and also because the middle part, a huge stretch of the middle part, and even the ending part, is very politically focused, and Isayama wanted to incorporate that aesthetic, those ideas into the series, that he kind of just kept going farther and farther and farther and farther into the rabbit hole. I will not, and I don't like to make assumptions on people's character. That's why I say inherently I don't think that he initially wanted to make like a manga with all of this fascist, like pro-fascist messaging and all of these like Jewish conspiracy stuff in it, but that is what he has ultimately created. And I think it's more so, again, falling into this rabbit hole and perhaps intentionally, perhaps unintentionally, inserting those themes into the series as a whole. And now now the manga is just such a mess. And it's bizarre how many people continue to not continue to like it. I don't think that it's wrong if you don't want to engage your brain in something. If you just want, I don't know, entertainment, I don't think you're allowed to enjoy anything as long as you're not hurting people, right? That's always been my thing. But it does concern me when people dismiss legitimate criticism about the series as, well, you're just a hater and therefore, you know, that you just want to hate it. Like, no, actually. Exactly. So, as Rin has said here, there's something really uncomfortable about Attack on Titan. Even if you can't tell how militant and nationalistic it is, I'd have liked the series more if it was more like Vinland Saga, and I agree a lot with that. So, what Rin's talking about, Japanese media has a real issue with being very nationalistic anyway. I think that's just a symptom of being media in a generally pretty conservative society that's had a very conservative political party at the forefront for decades at this point. And that's why I dislike and I don't follow series that do have military themes and don't examine them. Like Fullmetal Alchemist has military, like it has a military in it. A lot of the characters are in the military, but it does inherently examine the flaws in that system and is very critical of the military, of the government and militant government, and you know, military's role and these ideas of war and things like that. And so that's different from something where compared to like the saga of Tanya the Evil or Gate or something, where somebody is inserted into a military situation and gets like super excited and becomes like the best super fighter or strategist or general or whatever. There's just something very different about how those series feel and how that kind of reflects Japan's depiction of those things. I think, and again, this is maybe not an incorrect generalization, but there's a lot of revisionism. We know there's a lot of revisionism in Japan about the Second World War. Obviously, the way they educate about World War II and Japan's involvement in World War II is very different from the realities of the situation. And for those who were directly impacted by the Japanese forces during and after, of course, as well, because it didn't stop with World War II. Korea has a lot to say about that. There's a reason why a lot of people in Asia, the rest of Asia, don't like the Japanese military, any of that, because there still is no real acknowledgement of that. Similar thing. It's just in so much of their media, right? And it's sometimes you can be like, okay, I'm just reading this as like a sprawling sci-fi epic, and I'm not really engaging with it as a piece of media from a particular country or culture. But at the same time, those series are a product of a particular country and culture and a particular time as well, from that culture. Yeah, there's something that just really irks me, and again, I feel like if you know anything about the Japanese involvement with World War II, the occupation of all of Asia by the Japanese, basically, the attempted invasion of Australia by the Japanese, and the whole, and again, like the Anzac POWs, and there's a lot of shit that Japan did, and still just is like, no, we didn't even do anything. We didn't do anything. We weren't even in this war. We just were basically pure victims. And you're like, that's actually, no, that's not true. There's a lot of obfuscation of the facts, and people aren't taught their history, which we know is bad because that's what allows history to repeat itself. If you hide the reality of history, you're bound to repeat its mistakes, right? Yes, Japan. If any of you have watched the film Australia, not a wonderful film, but there's a bombing in that film of Darwin, which is way up in the Northern Territory. That's an actual real life thing that happened. That's a real. They attacked Darwin on multiple occasions, bombed them on multiple occasions, and even the Australian government at the time didn't even tell the rest of Australia that had happened. So it's not a very wide known fact, but it is something that happened. And there's anyway. So yeah, there's, like Ren said here, there's something different from like gangsters and criminal organizations, whether it be mafia, yakuza, or even like gangs and delinquents and things like that feel different from an organized military group. And because, I don't know, right? The Yakuza aren't, well, I mean, the Yakuza are, but the Yakuza aren't actively trying to make Korea like an annexed part of Japan. They weren't the ones who went into Singapore and Papua New Guinea and Malaysia and just slaughtered people and was like, this is ours now, right? This is the empire now. We own this. They didn't do that. The Japanese military did do that. And it wasn't until the Anzacs, which are the Australian and New Zealand military force, if you're not aware, the Anzacs, and then, of course, later the Americans, once they got involved in the war, that actually stopped that and was like, hey, no, actually, no, you don't, no. And so, yeah, and of course, we know that Japan didn't want, they liked Korea too much, so there was still a lot of occupation of that area. The imperialism inherent in a lot of Japanese media, and the pro-imperialism, that's the issue as well. It's the pro-military, the pro-imperial ideals that some of these shows frame, or some of these series frame, is what I have an issue with. Like, I didn't have an issue with Shigeru Mizuki's manga about the war and about World War II and his experiences in the Japanese military, because he was incredibly anti-war. He saw the atrocities firsthand, he experienced them, and was like, we as a society, as a culture, allowed the worst things humanly imaginable to happen to innocents without, and now everyone just wants to forget about it. Oh no, it wasn't our fault. Oh no, we got bombed, and so thus we are, void of any kind of acknowledgement of that. and the fact that series like, and they're both valuable, like they're both important and wonderful, but the fact that the narrative of Japan's involvement is the bombing, like the fire bombings, and then obviously Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is that, and not, oh hey, yeah, also we went into literally all of Asia, especially Southeast Asia, and we're just there and raped all their women and slaughtered everyone else and captured all of the Allied forces and subjugated them worse than anyone has ever been able to describe. There's none of that. There's very little of that ever, even in outside of Japanese media. So there's a big imbalance there. And again, I don't think it's not a coincidence that Mizuki especially railed against nationalism. Like, it's not a surprise, because again, he experienced it. He saw the terrible things that the Japanese military did to people, and also their own soldiers. Like, they would just send them to go on suicide runs because they didn't care. They didn't care if all of these hundreds of thousands of soldiers died if it brought glory to the motherland. In the same way that Russia just kept pumping people out to die by the hundreds of thousands, but it was fine because Russia must, be the best. It's just, yeah. And those are my issues with that, right? And with Attack on Titan in particular. So it's aping the aesthetic off of Nazi Germany, right? Like, I don't think that's a controversial statement to say. It's very obvious. And then it tries to integrate more nuanced political discussions about all sorts of things. But by doing so, and yes, Mizuki did lose his arm in the Second World War, and was still an incredible artist and incredibly accomplished for that. But so it not only has that element, the very pro-militaristic element of like, oh, isn't this military group that defies all of the odds but is super good, and the only and also is the only one group that really ever does things. Everyone else just gets slaughtered, and you're like, I know these are our main characters, and I know all of these quote unquote red shirts die all of the time. Like, the Attack on Titan introduces characters so they can immediately be eaten into pages. Like, it's a revolving door of characters, and I don't know how anyone can remember anyone's name or what they look like or anything outside of like the main core group of characters. Yes, see, exactly. And it's the rewriting of history. It's the hiding of the narrative. It's the reframing of the narrative. That is the issue. And for a lot of these people coming from the privilege of having benefited directly either through the war or immediately after the war, thanks to America not just letting Japan flounder, that are, like, they don't want to challenge it. Of course they don't, because they're sitting pretty. They're happy. They don't have to worry about their family and their inherent situation and their children's futures and all of this. They made good, and so they don't care about what the truth of the matter is. They don't want to jeopardize that. But yes, so if you're reading Attack on Titan currently, and I'm not up to date, as I said, I still have 10 chapters left. Maybe something incredible happens that will change my opinions, but I doubt it. Because not only has every main female character, except for Mikasa, died and or become the subject of a horrible situation. Although they did bring one character back, and it's like, oh, that's a surprise. Like that was at least interesting. It changed things up. I was like, oh, okay, that's nice to see another familiar face for once. Two, it has this. Not only do they have this revolving door of characters, all of these characters that are introduced just to be immediately murdered and killed in the most grotesque and over the top way, and they try to make you like invested in any point, and when you see them, like, why I'm not going to care about this person because I literally know they're going to be dead in 2 panels. Like, why? It loses the impact when you're just churning out these deaths for shock value. It doesn't make it feel like, oh, this situation is so dangerous, and that, like, we already know the Titans are dangerous. Like, we already know that this situation is dire and that people die all the time. You don't need to be like, oh no, it's Eflon, look, he and his good friend who have been together since this, and that we have known because of this. I'm like, we don't know these people. We're told that we're supposed to be interested in these people, and then they just immediately die. And I'm like, well, I knew that. Like, I don't care about their sick mother or whatever that you tried to make me care about. I don't care. I've never met this person. Why should I care? Another point of pro-military media that we see a lot, and you see in real life, is the recruitment of people in lower socioeconomic situations, in desperate situations. There's a reason people join the military in the US to get a university education. Like, it's just a super duper scary and just predatory system. And yeah, just and like, again, the other thing is, I understand that I don't know her. I don't know who that is. And that is literally like every other Attack on Titan character aside from the like 5, maybe 7 named characters still around that you were originally introduced to. But also, and people, I don't care if you're one of these people who says that Attack on Titan has good art. It's not bad art. It's Isayama's style. We can't be friends. Like, I'm sorry, but it's just, I read a lot of manga where the style is not pretty, or it's not like a generic manga style. It's not something that a lot of people would necessarily think of as manga. Daisuke Igarashi, Taya Matsumoto, Kyoka Okazaki. There's a million. There's so many very talented artists who have styles that aren't, My Hero Academia or Fruits Basket, or, manga style, anime style art. And that's that's phenomenal. I love when styles do have something more unique, when you can tell a series immediately from how the art is drawn, like who has created that. Attack on Titan, I think people say that he has a good style because he uses a lot of heavy brushwork, lots of blacks. It's very messy, thick lines. But this is the point that I'm about to say, is that when you have a scene, a static scene, where all of your characters, all of your main characters are sitting at a table having dinner together and or having a conversation. I don't even remember what it was. And this is an actual panel, and I remember seeing it. And it's a perspective shot. So the table is like, obviously you're seeing the whole length of the table. So there's people sitting all the way down. Every person's head in this perspective shot is the same size, which is not how that works. And I couldn't tell you who was who for like 90% of the people, because Armin and Krista, aka Historia, always look exactly the same in like every panels they're in. Half the time I'm like, who is this? I don't know. Trying to tell the difference between Mikasa, Eren, Levi, and just half the cast. You're like, who is this? The faces are so inconsistent anytime that it's not like a straight up like, oh yes, this is my face right here in the panel. It's honestly, there in the new parts of the manga as well. So I'm going to spoil this terrible manga. It's not a spoiler if you're watching the current season, but after a point, the series introduces new characters, right? It introduces Falco, is that his name? Falco and Gabi, who are new child soldiers from a new terrible city, and they're from this military that's been doing all this bad shit to Eren's homeland, and oh my goodness, this whole conspiracy. Oh no, child soldiers. There was, in the most recent chapter that I read, which was like 135 or something, I don't know. There was a scene where Gabi was like washing her face, about to move out, do whatever, become a good person, leave her terrible background of being a child soldier for the bad military behind. And she's like swiping thing like this, looking at herself in the mirror. You could take that screenshot, right? And I almost did. You could screenshot that and pick like 10 Eren faces from anywhere in the first 2/3 of the series, smush them all together and be like, okay, which one's the girl? Which one is the not our protagonist in this series? I bet you couldn't tell because they look identical. It's rough. It's a rough time. And then the other thing, there's so much race purity spouted in this series. The idea of all of being able to tell people's race from their blood. Oh God, that's not really terrible fake science at all. No, not at all. That's not Nazi propaganda right there. The Marley children, or the Marleyans, whatever it is. Yes, exactly. Just yet another to tick off the list. Every female character, except for Mikasa, of any note, as I said, is either dead or in a terrible situation, aka with a rape baby and just like shored up somewhere and forgotten about. Hanji, or I. Is the jury out? Because this was such a thing in like old timey fandom. I say old timey, like 2012 fandom when the first series came out. There's people arguing about Hanji's gender. I don't know if it's confirmed, whatever, but disregarding Hanji, I just every other female character in the core, and especially in the core group, are dead and or left with rape baby, which is. And then the other race purity thing, which is something that I talk about a lot, and some people are like, "Oh my goodness, I never thought of that." Is the fact that the two coolest, like super awesome fighters, best is Levi and Mikasa, who, spoilers, are related to each other. They're uncle and nephew. And spoilers, are both the only Asians in the cast. And if that doesn't smell like race purity, race supremacy bullshit, then I don't know what could be more convincing to people, because it's just, and then again, not even to get into the whole comparisons with this idea of the Marleyans being Jews, being subjugated, but then also the other group being Jews, and the idea of everything being like this big conspiracy, and there's people pulling strings from behind, which is a very anti-Semitic frame of conspiracy. This whole idea of like, oh yes, the Jewish order is controlling the whole world, and is lizard people. It's so much anti-Semiticism in this series. So much. The fact that Titans are the designs for Titans. Isayama has said he based off of drunk foreigners that he was afraid of, that he thought were scary, because foreigners are kind of loud when they're drunk, and that terrified him. And thus he made them into horrifying monsters, of which our main cast should just slaughter indiscriminately. It's just, I could go on for hours about this series. Yes, Japan specifically. This series, it's been just so much wrong with Attack on Titan. Again, this like idea of Children of Ymir, which are like obviously this group that has been terrorized by Titans for however long. And so Eren like goes into this weird dreamscape, and he sees his. Also, it has the Star Wars thing where like everyone who's important is related to each other, i.e., Mikasa and Levi, and then Eren, and obviously Grisha, his father, and Zeke, who's like the villain of the piece. They're all related, and then there's and Zeke's mother was part of this royalty. It's just everyone is this weird bloodline thing. This weird bloodline thing where it's basically one family who's messing up everyone else's shit. But so Eren goes into the weird dreamscape, and Zeke is like, okay, I'm gonna free my people. I'm gonna get revenge for all of these years of being treated as second-class citizens, and in doing so, he's like, and the way that we do that is we basically just allow the children of Ymir to just not be able to reproduce. We're gonna eugenics this shit, right? If you die out as a race, then everyone will be happy. We'll have our freedom. or something. It's just, oh, no. And then Aaron's like, no, that's evil and gross and weird. And it's like, wow, you're actually saying something that's not super bad and problematic and terrible and actual Nazi, propaganda and rationale. And he's like, I reject that, half brother of mine. But then, and he's like, look, that is the original Ymir over there, who the slave girl who made the deal with the devil and like then got Titans. And even in her afterlife, she is still a slave. And I'm like, yikes, okay. It's like, she will always be a slave. And Aaron's like, I will, no, what? He just sounded like I'm gonna free her from slavery, but then it's like, no, but actually she'll always be a slave, so why even? She wants to be a slave. Actually, her soul is like, I should be a slave. That's not how, no. Attack on Titan, no. No. And people wonder why I hate this series. Like, there's just, and this is just the weird little things that I remember, because there's so much terrible stuff that I've purged from my brain over the course of reading this series. It's not funny. It's not funny. And again, I think, like, with this idea of that Attack on Titan's anti-war, it's not, right? Isayama is clumsily trying to do this like cycle of hate thing and like, oh no, you shouldn't. And again, which may have been his original idea, like, oh, you can't solve hatred with hatred, you can't solve bigotry with bigotry, you can't stop wars with wars, right? Which is all good and fine and whatever, and that those are in the series. But literally 2 chapters before that, some of our beloved characters that we're supposed to enjoy and like and support are like, oh hey, yeah, actually, I think that in order to get rid of bigotry, we should just genocide all the bigots. That'll fix it. We'll just get rid of everybody who doesn't like us. That seems like a perfectly rational idea. And I'm not talking about like some weird secondary character. No, I'm talking about Jean. I'm talking about like a character who we've been following, and he's not like, oh, emotionally reacting to it. He's yelling this, and then it's just. I tweeted about it because this was in the chapters that I read this week, right? So this is where everyone should die. Literally everyone should die. And the thing is also, like, the only character that I care about is Armin, because he's still a good boy. And honestly, Mikasa has grown on me a lot. Because I didn't like her at all at the beginning. But the two of them are the only ones with, like, well, no, Armin's the only one with half of a pea brain cell to be like, let's not genocide everyone. Let's actually, like, not do all of this terrible racist, bigoted stuff and do exactly the same stuff that was done to us, right? That just makes us as bad as these people who have been doing bad stuff to us. Only one. Connie, oh, that lovable comedic character was in these chapters, in that I read this week, was totally up for murdering a child, killing a child in order to get his mom back. And I'm like, okay, yeah, it's sad your mom turned into a Titan. I get it. Like, if you wanted to get your family back, it's rough. But also, dude, it's been 4 years, and, like, sometimes you just gotta accept some things. If the alternative of, like, have your mom as a Titan forever, or get your mom back, but at the cost of a human life, murdering a person in cold blood. I don't think oh god. And and the thing is, like, my thoughts and memories of a lot of this stuff, as I said, is very jumbled, is very all over the place. I'm remembering the most egregious stuff that stuck out to me. But every time I have a conversation about these sorts of issues, these sorts of problems with other people who have similar grievances with the series as I do, they always bring up certain, like, examples and certain themes and things that I didn't either remember or I didn't realize because they're not like I initially. I mean, there's a lot of anti-Semitic stuff in this series, but I didn't connect the idea of, like, the grand conspiracy, like the world one group is behind all world leaders pulling the strings, as again, like, that being connected again to anti-Semiticism, which other people have and do. And I was like, oh yes, yeah, actually, yeah, oh my god, you're right. So yeah, Attack on Titan's a mess. The last chapter that I read, our heroes, quote unquote, were like, okay, we're gonna go save the world. And I'm like, wow, did you... I wish you'd done this before, like, half of your group was totally down to murder, like, to start another war and murder innocent women and children and genocide everyone who disagreed with you. I'm supposed to just forget that you said that two chapters ago? I guess so, but I'm not gonna forget that. So now that you're like, yes, we want to fix everything. We don't want to genocide everybody. Why should I believe that? Like, literally, why should I believe that? You're spouting more hateful stuff for longer than you've been like, oh yeah, I'm gonna try and stop Aaron from doing his dumb shit and someday live in peace and stop this war or whatever. Nah. It's a train wreck. And I'm so deep into it that I have to finish it at this point. I have to see how it ends. It'll be so beyond comprehension, I think, that I just really hope that Isayama finishes with this series and somehow, and this isn't going to happen because it's still super popular, hugely popular. It has a freaking, like, theme park land in Universal Studios Japan, right? It's hugely popular. It's part of the pop culture there. It's so inherently ingrained at this point that I just don't want his popularity from this series to mean that he's guaranteed to run around and create whatever he wants after it's done. Like, sure, let him make his millions from this, but just end it with this. I don't want it to become like an Oba situation where Death Note was so super popular and that guaranteed that Bakuman was picked up immediately, and also people loved it and still, and again, we're not going to get into Bakuman, but has such and that went on for way too long. And then people ended that and were like, oh, brilliant, genius, nobody's ever written a manga about manga except for all of these people, but no, this is genius. I love when my plucky underdog manga series has more sexism in it than, like, anything, literally anything I can think of. This is truly what manga is. I just want it to be over. And I'm glad that at least with Oba, I think maybe Platinum End finally But even that, far, far beyond what it should have been. I never read that one, but I've heard nothing but terrible things about Platinum End. And in the same line, it's like, I don't think Naruto is bad, but also it's like interesting that the follow-up Samurai 8 was hyped up so much. They wanted it to be so good, and then it just flopped super badly. And I kind of think that maybe just let Isayama live off of his fascism dollars, and so I never have to interact with his stuff ever again and have people like automatically say that a new series of his is the best thing ever because he wrote it. And how dare you question a creator who made something so good. I honestly, like, I would not, knowing how Japan's offices and representations and stuff tend to be, that this wouldn't even surprise me. They'd be like, oh yes, you know what you should do? You should draw the tourism posters for Japan as to why we're so good, why we're the best country ever, actually. Actually, why we deserve to have Korea. Like, Anyway, Attack on Titan, I finished 5-10 chapters. I finished 135, 136, something like that. I don't really remember, and I don't care, but I still do have half a dozen or something chapters to read. And I was reading it this week because it's like, I want to catch up because I feel like it's ending soon. But it literally hurt my brain to try and read more than a chapter an hour. I was like, I need to mentally purify myself after some of the trash that is spouted in that series. And it's just so, and the way it's framed in a way that is so easily dismissed by the narrative and therefore dismissed by fans. Again, I don't think you're inherently a bad person if you enjoy Attack on Titan. But I do think that it is your responsibility to actually take into consideration people's legitimate criticisms of things, and why, and maybe also reflect on the series if you're not someone who engages with it critically. And again, not to make you not want to read it, or you should hate it or whatever. If you enjoyed it, if it makes you happy, whatever. I mean, I'm not probably going to be your friend, but I do think that I'm of the belief that if you're a fan of anything, that you should have a healthy relationship with it, and you should be able to take criticism of whatever you enjoy. But man, Attack on Titan has a lot wrong with it, and a lot that's very overt, very, very in your face, and I kind of don't know how people miss it or ignore it, just to be able to get entertainment from it. And also, I'm sorry. Where's the question? Zach, I'm sorry I ignored your question for like half hour. I am getting Tono Monogatari because I love Shigeru Mizuki. Obviously. I make no secret of that. And of course, I'm the biggest yokai fan ever, right? So when I saw that was being released, I pre-ordered it that day, and I'm pretty sure every so often I check and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make sure that this. I love Mizuki stuff. Honestly, I recommend Kitaro because it's fun and funny and just all around great kind of spooky, creepy kids horror fun time. And then if you want to actually engage in some anti-war Japanese comics, then all of his non-Kitaro manga that we have in English is that, right? So Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths, Showa, especially obviously the stuff covering the Second World War, and Hitler, which is a biography. It's just, it's much more, I don't know, just much more true. It doesn't feel like the glossing over of propaganda, of forgetting and hiding the truth. There's so many spin-offs. That's the other thing. Attack on Titan, at the height of its popularity, we got all of its spin-offs licensed. I read one volume of Spoof on Titan way back when not Spoof on Titan, Attack on Titan Junior High, and holy moly, that was the word, like legitimately the most unfunny thing I ever read. I don't think I laughed once, and my sister, I was complaining about it, and the one joke that she laughed at was a joke where Armin had quote unquote Jerry Maguire? Who's the Spider-Man guy, the actor? His tears, because that actor did like the weepy Spider-Man. I don't even know. It wasn't even a good joke, and it was. Oh, I hate that was so. And then there was Before the Fall, which was, oh my goodness, edgy. God, that's the most, as if the series isn't edgelordy enough, but that was so bad. And then Lost Girls, which was also Tobey Maguire. Thank you, folks. I am not good with actor names like at all, so thank you. Tobey Maguire tears. Tobey Maguire tears. They said that Armin had, and I was like, okay. And I think really my sister laughed because she recognized the person. Like, oh yeah, okay, that's a recognizable name. But yeah, most unfunny manga. Before the Fall, the just most absurd edgelord bullshit ever. His mother was eaten by a titan, and then the titan was like killed, and then from that, ripped from his mother's womb within the titan, he was born. I was like, oh my god, this is the stupidest shit I ever read. Oh god, I cringed so super hard. And then the Lost Girl stuff, half was focused on Mikasa, who at the time I didn't like, and that series or didn't really help me to like her anymore, and then I did, and then the second half was based off of Annie, which was a little bit more interesting, but also ultimately not that interesting. And then there's the Levi prequel, which was fine, but then later directly contradicted the background stuff that Levi's character was shown in the manga. So it's all just a mess. Yeah, so those were the 3 digital manga that I read this week. 2 of them were good. The other one I knew wasn't going to be good, but I do want to finish it at some point because it's so popular. It's so culturally ingrained, and I don't like to dismiss or disregard things, especially super popular things. and give an opinion on something if I haven't read or watched it. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of very popular stuff that I haven't read before or watched before because I'm just not nostalgic for it. I never experienced it as an 8-year-old like everyone else seemed to. But I'm not going to make, objective or subjective claims about its quality because I'm just like, I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know. People like it. I've never seen it. It is my typical reaction, as you guys have experienced many, many times. But yes, finished with digital manga. I do have a couple not digital mangas. we're done with the rant about Attack on Titan. We'll see how I go when it ends. That'll be a time. So the first and only manga that I read that I own is one of the more recent volumes of a series that I absolutely adore. I needed to purify my soul after the experience that was Attack on Titan. And that was volume 7 of Hakumen Mikuchi. So, pardon me. So this is by Takuto Kashiki. It's published in Harta magazine for long-time viewers, subscribers, watchers, listeners, whatever. You will know that I typically the stuff that's in Harta is stuff that I end up loving. Some of my favorite series came out of Harta. Obviously, all of Kawamori stuff is from Harta. All of Aki Irai's stuff is from Harta magazine. This, obviously. Nicola traveling around the demon's world is from Harta. I'm trying to think. There's a lot. Oh, Delicious in Dungeon as well. Like, there's just lots of really good stuff in that magazine. And I love when we get stuff licensed from that magazine. So, this is another series with an anime that I haven't seen. So this is Hakumen Mikuchi, right? And it follows these two little people. I guess it's kind of like The Borrowers, if people are familiar with that book and or movie, where they're just like little teensy people. And these two are adult women who live together. I guess roommates, maybe something more. We don't actually know. They're friends, if nothing else. And so this is Hakume. This is Mikochi. And Hakume is she's like a builder. She does construction work and renovation and waterproof. Like, she paints and is a bricklayer and all of these things. So that's just, she's in the construction industry. And then Mikochi she works at a store, kind of freelance, but she typically does like recipe food stuff, also kind of clothing design. She's a little bit more of I don't know if homely is quite the right word, but yeah. Anyway. And this is pure slice of life. Like, this is pure. Every chapter is them going and finding new food, or like meeting new people, or having a new experience. And I love it. And so this is a world where obviously there's like these little borrower people who live in the woods, and also this kind of live with animals, and it's just really magical. I love it so much. It's really sweet. Also, the art is phenomenal. It's just quite... this is such a beautiful page. So the first chapter in this volume had a story about taking the avian mail, which is obviously mail delivered by birds, and is like quite expensive, and they save up a lot to try and do it. And they, in preparation, they had to get like a lot of stuff ready, and they were kind of grumbling as to why they had to, but then actually experiencing it was so incredible. But like, look at how beautiful that artwork is. It's just, oh, I love it so much. And then it's just really creative. The way that these characters interact with the world in the scale, understanding the scale, and how that affects what they can use, what they can utilize. Like, there's one character whose house is made out of an eggshell. A lot of these characters, like Mikuchi, will buy food, like mushrooms, and they're to scale like real mushrooms, but because they're so little, buying one will last them a super long time. But then some of their friends are like ferrets or moles or badgers or something, who are much larger, and then so there's a difference in scale in how they interact. It's just really super. If this one would focus, I don't know. It's just really great. It's the day-to-day lives of these two and the other people, the people they've met in the town and the city that they work with, that they meet along the way. And it just is lovely. If you're looking for something very down-to-earth slice of life with a bit, with kind of a magical, there's no magic in it, right? But with this sort of magical realism to it, this hidden world, but not an edgy hidden world. This hidden world that kind of coexists with nature. It's just, it's magical in a way that they're like little, I mean, they're not fairies, but it's kind of that same idea. Yes, and as in Attack on Titan, it's all of the characters actually look like themselves when they're on panel. Like the fact that, like, in this picture, you can see they're waiting in line, and there's a squirrel waiting with them, and then in this one, there's a frog, and so they're kind of similar sizes. But then later on, like you can see Hakumen with one of her co-workers, and he's way bigger than her because he's like a ermine or something, or a ferret. And Mikoshi is with her employer, if it would focus, but she's here, and her employer is a badger, so she's like way bigger. It's just really cute. It's really sweet. I love it. And it's still ongoing. So I think volume 8 has come out, so I need to get that before, because I kind of took a long time to get this new volume. It's been out for a little while. It wasn't super high on the priority list, but every time I read it, it just makes me feel so warm and fuzzy and like relaxed, and you just want to spend time in this magical little world with all of these teensy little people, and it's super cute. And then, okay, so that's the actual manga that I own, that I read. And then I read a whole bunch of library manga, all from the same series, though, so I will be hopefully wrapping up soon, fingers crossed. But the last manga series that I read this week was volumes 3 to 6 of the Perfect Edition of 20th Century Boys by Naoki Urasawa, as you can tell. Well, I don't know. Only these one. They only have this. They don't have a spine thing. I don't know if that's. I don't really know why. Because maybe libraries just don't do that anymore. But the older stuff, they still do that. So if you're not aware of this series, this is the first time I'm reading this series, and I like Urasawa's work, but I do find a lot of it is kind of a one-time read or a teensy bit bloated for what it is. He's incredibly good at what he does, right? Like I'm not knocking him. I love a lot of his works. Monster's great. Pluto is my absolute favorite. I really enjoyed the Louvre one that he did, Sign of Dreams, Mujiroshi, or whatever it is. Great. Love them. People also love this series. And I'm enjoying it. I do like it. I think it's very good. I've also heard that it doesn't end super well. So I feel like his longer series, and also Master Keaton. I enjoy Master Keaton, but the thing about his longer series is that they are a little bit too much. I feel like there are certain things that could be pulled, but then in saying that, right? So if you don't, 20th Century Boys is about a group of kids, a group of childhood friends, who were 10 years old in 1970, and they were really good friends. And as a 10-year-old, they had a secret hideout, and we're just boys having fun, living their lives. And then as a group, I think they buried a time capsule to be opened in the future. But the leader of this group, Kenji, he wrote this notebook that would prophesize the future, prophesize the new century. And it was a whole bunch of ideas that were directly impacted from what was going on in the news then, and what was cool, like the giant robot stuff. And they wanted to go to the World Fair and do all this stuff. And so it was this kind of superhero story, or giant robot story, or whatever. This adventure, save the day book of prophecy, in where catastrophe would befall the world, the nation and the world, and then our hero would come and save the day, and the world is saved, and yay! Right, and so they kind of forget about it. They bury it, and they live their lives, and they grow up, and they drift apart, and whatever, normal stuff. But several decades later, they start to notice, especially Kenji, starts to notice that some of the stuff that he put in this book of prophecy, and major stuff, like terrorist attacks, and where there's gas leakage, bioterrorism, probably a better phrase, and the Diet building blowing up, and the airport blowing up, and whatever, right, was happening. It started to happen. And they're like, wait, huh? What the hell? And so they got to get the band back together. So all of these kids, all of these men, all of these now 40-year-old men, are reconnecting in order to try and save the world. Stop the world from ending, and stop the person who is doing this from doing this, right? And so I read the first 2 volumes a long time ago. Well, last year. And when jumping into this book, I remembered a lot of those first books, but I kind of needed a refresh. Like, I kind of was a little bit lost initially with this one because starting with this volume, the timelines really jump around. So before it was just jumping around from like 1970 to 1997/2000, right? Like these two eras, the 10-year-old boys and then now these 40-year-old men. But with the end of the last book, we are Kana is Kenji's niece, who originally, like at the beginning of the story, is 3 years old. It's his sister's daughter, who he's been raising. But when the quote-unquote end of the world happens at the end of 2000, it starts to jump around from like what happened then to 2014 when Kana is older. So we start, rather than following Kenji and the other men, we're following more of Kana now and how she fits into this, and then how the remaining men, who are now again another 15 years older, so the 55-year-old men, and their relationship and how they're still trying to fight this evil in the world. And it's good. Like, there's a lot of, this is kind of an ESP superpower, but also conspiracy mystery series. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff with this. It's certainly engaging. I think there's a lot of really great characters. I think there's a lot of really great scenarios in this. I do think it's well constructed. So that's the first one. But I do, even now, even with like some of the boys, men in this group, I kind of forget like who's who, or like who's doing what, who is necessarily like Kenji is obvious, right? The other guy, the other main guy, Ocho, he and his child counterpart is pretty memorable. And just because I've been reading this, Yoshitsune and his child counterpart is memorable. I wouldn't have remembered anyone's names if I hadn't just read this like a day ago, but it's good. Like it, and again, it's pretty classic Urasawa. There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of build up. So it's quite a slow burn mystery, right? But I can definitely understand why people do enjoy this series, do love this series, do think of it as some of his best stuff. And as Archangel Manga has said here, if my mouse would like to work, I do think it's a good series. I'm enjoying it. I've had a great time reading it, but like with a lot of Urasawa's stuff, it's probably not a series I'm really gonna. I wouldn't buy this series. Is maybe the best way to put that. I'm not. It's not that I dislike it, but I don't. The only Urasawa manga that I still own, because I used to own Monster, I've since sold it on, and not because I don't like Monster. We know this, but I own the anime, and that's a 1-to-1 adaptation. So I just would rather have that than the 9 volumes of these thick omnibus editions for that. It just takes up a lot of space. But I wouldn't, like, this isn't one that I'd put money down for the physical versions. I'd maybe buy it digitally, but because my library has it, I don't need to, which is always a plus. Yeah. So I am just over halfway through, and then of course there's the sequel series, which is 21st Century Boys. So I guess we'll see how it goes from here, but it's a solid, quite a few revelations. A lot of in this volume, in volume 3, aka volumes 5 and 6, we do set up this kind of new generation of characters and new scenario and this new timeline in 2014, which is good. That's cool. It does. I feel like initially I felt like it distracted from what made the series really good. Was the involvement of these like guys trying to come back and fix an issue that they didn't even think that they'd created, but they're now taking responsibility for a childhood game kind of idea. But once Kana and sort of the modern day became a little bit more ingrained, I was enjoying it more. But yeah, I still think that for my physical collection, I probably will only keep Pluto for a multi-volume series. I've got a couple of his single-volume stuff, which is also good, but multi-volume, I think Pluto is kind of as long as for his series, because that one's just like, it's so tight and to the point. It doesn't have a lot of the fluffing around, and also, I don't know, I feel like with the jumping around, it sometimes feels like you're missing scenes between characters. I don't know. It's not, again, not to say that I dislike it or haven't been enjoying it, but it's just, it's an Urasawa work. Like, I don't need to convince people to read this. It's good. It's very, very good at what it wants to be, which is this suspense thriller mystery with a supernatural twist in this particular, supernatural. ESP power, like maybe superpowers, maybe a better word. I don't know. How do people qualify ESP? Psychic powers. But yeah, I'm happy that I can read it through the library. I don't have to pay $35 for one of these volumes. Yeah. So that was everything that I read for this week. And obviously, I've been talking for way too long. Get that little tickle out of my throat. And now I'm good. All right. But thank you guys for hanging out with me. I'm sorry that it went on for way long, but we know that that's kind of just how life is on my channel. That's just how things are. And I appreciate you putting up with my endless ranting on Attack on Titan and the many, many multitudes of problems that series has and that people love to ignore. My jumbled thoughts on other series, including, of course, Summertime Rendering, which is very good, and Ajin, which is also very good, both of which ended this week. Continuing a little bit more on brand with my channel and my reading. Hakumen Mikuchi. Nice to also just kind of have a break from all of this moody. Moody is the best word. Moody seinen, revenge, mystery, suspense stuff, with some just sweet ladies living their life, eating jam and helping the ferret doctor and doing laundry and stuff. And then, of course, 20th Century Boys, which I literally just talked about. But yeah, so that was all the manga that I read this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. As for next week, lockdown is no longer, strict lockdown is no longer in place where I am, so we are able to go back into the office and things are open and stuff again. But because of mandatory mask wearing, and because there's no real reason to go into the office. My where I work, I don't think anyone will be I think everyone will just be working from home. It's just easier. So it may mean that I do have time to read a little bit more than I did have recently. Although I say that, I didn't. I mean, this is a lot of the 20th Century Boys was a lot, but I didn't read manga every day. Didn't nearly read manga every day in lockdown this week. So, but I'm reading a novel. I just didn't get through it. So maybe next week I will have that finished so I can talk about some prose that isn't related to, well, it's kind of an Asian fantasy. So it's still still might fit with with typical discussion here, but it's not manga, and it's nice to read some words, some prose from time to time. I have some light novels and stuff to read as well, because if you haven't watched last month's pickup videos, you're smart because they're very, very long. But I got so much stuff, so many books, and I'm not even, there's quite a few of them that I haven't read yet still, so I am trying to, like normal, get through my physical backlog before doing anything else, before buying any more books, my pretty typical thing. And I'm also going to probably try to get some more manga recommendations and reviews and first impressions and things out, filmed and posted to the channel this week. So yeah, let me know what you want to see. As always, as you can see in the corner here, am on Twitter as @collectinggee. Yeah, I'm gonna go to bed because it is late and I got up at 6 o'clock this morning. So yeah, thanks guys so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye till then.